Miatta Fahnbulleh, I should say, that the New Economics Foundation, which you're chief executive, has been pushing for a new Green Deal in economics for a long time, and with climate extinction protests around us, we understand exactly why. But you've been trying to push that onto the Bank of England. Are you now having second thoughts about that?
Well, so I think there are two things, and I completely agree that actually the direction of the economy should be set by elected politicians, and unaccounted bodies and officials should be responding to that. And part of the problem that I think we've had is that there hasn't been enough direction about what's the structural change that we're trying to create in the economy. So you take something like quantitative easing, billions were created, and yes, it stabilised the economy, but it's had very little effect on the real economy. So 85% of bank lending goes to finance, insurance, and property, real estate. Only 8% goes into the real economy. SMEs are the backbone of our economy, and yet 2 to 3% of bank lending goes to SMEs, despite the fact they create 60%.
Explain to people listening, SMEs, small and medium-sized
companies that create 60% of jobs in this country, and yet only 2 to 3% of bank lending goes to them. So I think the big question for the central bank is, if you are doing things that has an impact and influence on the financial system, why are you not trying to direct them towards things that we think are socially and economically good? One is trying to create an economy that works for people, that creates jobs, that the real economy responds and creates benefits for people. The other is we've got this huge looming environmental crisis. We've got a climate emergency. The experts are telling us we've got basically about 10 years to take urgent action to halve carbon in our economy in order to mitigate the worst impacts of climate change. And yet we've got a central bank. And to be fair to Mark Carney, we have seen really important moves over the last 3 to 4 years.
We've also seen the Chancellor saying that will cost £1 trillion in the relatively near future.
Well, I think it was a little bit misleading in that number. So £1 trillion is both the cost to both the public sector and the private sector. But I wouldn't see it as cost. It's investment. It's absolutely investment. And so I think painting it as cost does two things. Firstly, it means that you're not factoring the cost of not doing anything and the impact of climate change on every aspect of our economy. Imagine the floods that we've had and multiply those tenfold. Imagine the hurricanes that we've seen across the world, multiply this. So human suffering, but the cost of dealing with the impact of climate is going to be huge, and it's far going to outweigh the £1 trillion. A huge amount of investment is going into dirty investment. So investments that can essentially prop up our fossil fuel industry, which is hugely risky. So one of the reasons why the central bank needs to respond anyway is that when you're thinking about long-term risk, at some point there's going to be a whole load of policy that's going to mean that fossil fuel is no longer sustainable, and the credit risk, the financial risk of that is huge. But in any case, they are making these decisions. So when we know that we need to have action on climate change, why not make deliberate decisions that prioritise that over dirty investment? So we're seeing a premium that's been put into clean investment within the financial markets already. But I think that, partly because of the pace at which we need to move, there is a really catalytic role that central banks can play. So, we talk about credit guidance. So making it absolutely clear that certain lending is positive, certain lending's not. I think you could go further and say, actually, we're going to cap lending to certain types of sectors that we think are dirty. We're going to put a quota, an expectation, and the market should be investing in particular types of green, clean, renewable investments. So I think there's a far bigger role that central banks can play, even within their existing mandate.